Welcome to episode 3 of the 1975 Babylift story as experienced by the last flight crew out of Saigon's Tan Son Nhut Airport as the city fell to the invading North Vietnamese Army. I'm Bob Von Bargen, President Emeritus of the Armed Forces Heritage Museum, and your host for this series. In the 2 previous episodes, you learned about the mission from Master Sergeant Rene Fougeray, who was the loadmaster. In today's episode, we will gain an insight into the mission as viewed from the C-141 cockpit. The aircraft commander, retired Brigadier General Wayne DeLauder, and his co-pilot, retired Lieutenant Colonel Bill Aubrey, will explain what happened as viewed from the flight deck of that C-141 while Rene took charge of the refugees in the cargo compartment. And at the conclusion, you will learn about what happened to some of the babies rescued during the Operation Babylift. Rene will tell us about events of the 30th anniversary celebration held at Pearl S. Buck Foundation in Doylestown, Pennsylvania. So let's join General DeLauder as he tells us what happened on that long day back in 1975.
I'm Wayne DeLauder. I was the aircraft commander on the Babylift mission that we're about to talk about. Back then I was an old man of the air crew, a 35-year-old major. You may have noticed I've gotten a bit older since then. Many of the memories of what happened in the past 50 years have faded away, some lost, but significant events are unforgettable. This Babylift mission was one of them. I began flying the 141 into Vietnam in 1965. This was followed by monthly trips nearly every month in the next 10 years. The only exception to this was my 12-month Vietnam tour where I flew a C-7A Caribou in 1967. This is a sketch of that airplane. Our aircrew on this mission, like others, were 2 loadmasters, 2 flight engineers, 2 navigators, and 2 pilots, my co-pilot being Captain Bill Aubrey.
Hi, I'm Bill Aubrey. I was the co-pilot on the Babylift flight with Wayne DeLauder back in April of 1975.
We left on this one from McGuire Air Force Base here in New Jersey on the 20th of April. By the 23rd, we were in Kadena, Okinawa. After crew rest, we went out to get ready to make a run to Guam. While we were pre-flying the cockpit for the leg to Guam, we got a call from base ops asking us to come back in because there's been a change. They also asked the loadmasters to report to the armory. While the navigators and I went to learn about the change, Bill, my co-pilot, stayed with the airplane to coordinate the additional fuel and to make changes to the cockpit. We were briefed that we would be flying to Saigon and the Philippines before going to Guam. Since the VC and the NVA were closing in on Saigon and the base, we were told to initiate a non-standard combat approach from high above the aircraft. This maneuver was one that I had done routinely in 1967 during the year that I was stationed at Cam Ranh Bay flying this Caribou all over Vietnam. It was a challenge, but it was fun back then, and I looked forward to doing it again. As I recall, the flight down to Vietnam was routine. Approaching Tan Son Nhut, we were able to start our descent directly from over that base. So just as with the Caribou in 1967, we made a tight corkscrew spiraling descent beginning at 10,000 feet to a tight circling alignment with the runway at the bottom. This kept us in a more secure area so that we weren't flying far from where we thought it was more secure, at least at the time. After landing, I parked the airplane near the base operations and positioned it toward the runway so we could quickly, if necessary, move straight out of there. I left the engines running at first to get out of there quickly if things turned bad. Only after the loadmaster determined how we could would load, actually, not unload because we were empty, did we shut the engines down. The only source for restarting the engines at that point was an APU, an auxiliary power unit that was built into the airplane. I prayed that it wouldn't fail because without it we would be stuck.
After getting down there, we found out that we had been tagged to evacuate some orphans that were going to be taken back to the United States. This proved to be a rather challenging part of our mission since we had no means to take small babies unaccompanied by themselves on the airplane. This is a cargo airplane that's not built for that. So the loadmasters did a great job of laying blankets down on the floor of the airplane and preparing it to leave. I was out at the airplane while Wayne was in the ops there in Saigon, and one of the ladies that was accompanying the kids was a little upset that she didn't get a 747 that she had been promised, but after convincing her this was one of the last airplanes that was going to be leaving Saigon, she accepted our flight, and we started loading. By my count, there was about 70 babies that I think were probably under 6 months old. They didn't appear to be over 2 feet long and seemed very small. We also had about 100 or more kids that were in the age range of, I would say, 6 to 12. We put those on the side-facing seats, and we had a family of about 15 that were being evacuated. I assume were government officials of some kind. So it was a very hot day. The babies came on board in little more than diapers and little t-shirt tops, and we just laid them on the floor, legs up in the air, and it was kind of traumatic. I had a 2-year-old daughter at the time, and I just couldn't imagine these kids, after having held my daughter, being taken out of the country like that.
Once the babies and the passengers were aboard, we wasted no time in cranking up and getting out of there. For the takeoff, I thought that a max power brake release could cause the babies and everyone sitting on the floor to roll in a bunch to the rear. So I began a smooth acceleration takeoff with ever-increasing thrust and speed. I stayed on the runway on that takeoff longer than normal to get extra speed so we can climb faster. Another consideration was pressurization. If we were to take a artillery round or two and being pressurized, we could have rapid decompression that would worsen any structural damage that the artillery round would cause. So we plan to delay pressurization until about 8,000 feet, where we would hopefully be out of range from anyone shooting at us. On climb out, I tried to keep the flight path close to the airfield by turning tightly at the same time climbing as rapidly as we could. After leveling off at our cruise altitude, the loadmasters reported that some of the babies were having breathing difficulties, so we initiated a rapid descent down to a lower cabin altitude so that they could breathe easier as we headed towards the Philippines. Throughout these 2 legs of the flight, Bill Aubrey, my co-pilot, did an incredible job of handling all the radio transmissions and navigation changes. This allowed me to just fly the airplane.
We managed to get out over the water, and I started to talk to the command post about the cargo that we had. We were scheduled to go to a different airport, but we decided that after discussion with them that we would go to Clark, which was the closest base that was accepting refugees at that time. Although there was ramp saturation, that was going to be the best place to go. And I want to say the Clark people did a wonderful job. It was a 2.5-hour flight, and they managed to get ready for us. On the way in, or en route, I talked to the other guy that was accompanying all these kids. He said he was a med student out of the East Coast. And he had a little booklet that had the names of all the kids and any information. And he said they had all been spoken for, and families were waiting for them when they got back to the States. It was dark by the time we landed in Clark, and took quite a while. They had contacted the wives of the NCOs and officers on base, and they had an adult carry one baby off at a time and stay with that child until they were taken care of. It was kind of a hectic situation, to say the least, to look back in the back of the airplane and see all these kids back there not crying, just laying there kind of wiggling around. The faces of the older kids were pretty flat. They didn't seem to be able to understand what was going on. No cutting up or anything. They were just sat there with blank looks on their face. We got to Clark, offloaded all the kids. Took quite a while. And our day wasn't done. We finished that, uploaded 145 more refugees, and off we went to Guam for their leg back to the United States.
In the following 9 days, we shuttled refugees between several Pacific islands before returning home to our home base in New Jersey on May the 2nd, 2 days after the fall of Saigon. It had been a busy but memorable 2-week trip for sure.
I saw an advertisement for a 30th year anniversary of the fall of Saigon, and given by the Pearl S. Buck Foundation with the refugees. And I called and I said I was one of the last planes that got out of there with the babies, and they said they would like to have me come down and, the ceremony. And when I walked in, this one gentleman came up. He found out who I was. He came up and saluted and said thank you. And he was a Vietnamese officer who left that day. There were several other, I remember this one gentleman probably in his 30s at that time. This was the 30th anniversary. He was one of the babies, and he was a doctor in Washington, and he came up and said thanks, and it was verified that he was on that airplane, and at that time he was an infant.
Mm-hmm.
So it was,
Wow.
it was pretty neat to see where a lot of these people who were there, the babies, which are not babies anymore, they were in their 30s, but they were a lot of professional people, businessmen, doctors, and it was pretty neat to see what happened.
Gives you a good feeling, doesn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah, it was nice. Especially being an enlisted man and getting saluted.
As the world changed, we established relations with Vietnam, and I was then flying corporate airplanes for Chase Bank, and our CEO was on a trip to establish a closer relationship for the banking in Vietnam, and it was almost 25 years to the day after I left Vietnam that time till I was back sitting on the same ramp, almost the same location, back in Tan Son Nhut Air Base. So it was a memorable trip, and one that I would never forget. But I think it's an indication of what the Air Force is able to do, adapt to the situation, and get the job done.